Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show. Hello. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show.
It's we're a little late this week, aren't we?
We are.
Sorry about that.
Life has been busy.
Well, that transitions well into my personal update, which is I've been just like heads down on this course because it was due today. So I finished it yesterday, which meant that I couldn't meet to do the podcast because I had to get all my course updates in so that they can review it today and get it published. So it is currently in review and hopefully will be published soon. So maybe next week I'll let you know when that's coming out. But basically, that's all I did. Now, the other thing that I've been working on in the meantime, now that I published the course today, is I've been getting the next update for Keep Track of My Games ready. Usually when I do a major update, it's like once a year, so it's kind of a big deal. So I try to do a video, tour of all the updates. I go and get all my stats. Did you know that since the last update, I've published 90 bug fixes and 20 quality of life updates to keep track of my games. So things have been happening, even though it looks quiet, on the blog and stuff. But I actually went to pull the stats. And the other cool thing, I have reached over 100 paying members, but not everybody pays every single month. So I think right now I'm at 99 patrons basically. So that's pretty cool stats.
That's so cool.
And yeah, I already mentioned it doubled revenue in 2025, so that's pretty cool.
I'll take that over no revenue, which is my current revenue.
Exactly. So yeah, I've scripted the video, I've recorded the demos, but then I got to do the face to camera stuff. So it feels like I'm just doing another little mini course, but it's actually just for my app. But what's new with you?
Well, we've been really busy over here as well. We had last week, we're catching up from me being sick. I got really sick this weekend and kind of steered out of it. And so I've been kind of addled sickness brain. And then we had estate planning yesterday. So we couldn't record yesterday because I was hanging out with a lawyer, which you all should do, by the way. You should set up a trust. If you have friends or family, kids, you should set up a trust so that when you pass, things aren't complicated for your loved ones. Yeah. Anyway, that's what we were doing. There was a lot of signatures involved, and everyone knows who everyone's line of succession is. Mm-hmm. So it's very Game of Thrones, except without all the murder.
Have you set up your GitHub line of succession too?
That is on my homework. I went, I was like, I think Kamran is probably on that.
Yep.
So
that's something that you don't really think about. How many of you out there know that GitHub allows you to name a successor, in the case of your passing or something like that? Who are you going to pass on your open source projects to, or your repos, right? Someone has to take care of that. Otherwise, no one will have access, right?
Yeah.
So, we don't like thinking about it, but it is important. It's a important thing to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
You also want your emergency binder. If something happens to you and people can't access your 1Password or your master password, you have to have that somewhere that someone else can access. So
yeah, we got that all squared away yesterday.
Good.
So all of the family knows where all of the things are and how to get at them.
Good.
So that was the whole thing.
It's just peace of mind,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been deep in Slay the Spire 2 content. I've been watching and playing Slay the Spire 2. It rocks. Go play Slay the Spire 2. I also am watching a ton of Balatro still, but Slay the Spire 2. And then, huge news, member of our Discord, Darkshines, has an Excalibur game coming out on Steam this Friday. There are Steam demos coming out this Friday, and the game is called Now That's a Big Dragon. So this is an Excalibur game on Steam super cool. They're using like a ton of advanced features. They're using shaders to do all this like 3D effects and doing all this cool, like all kinds of cool stuff. Normally Excalibur's 2D only, but with shaders, you can do anything you want.
Nice.
But it looks really cool.
That's awesome.
I'm really excited. This is so neat to see a game that is on Steam that I can talk about.
Yep. And
so cool.
We'll eventually make it onto our homepage and showcase on all those places too.
You know it.
That's awesome. That's sweet.
Yeah. Right. Congratulations, Darkshines, for your game. That's awesome.
Congrats. Should we move on to the news for the week of March 2nd?
We should.
Hey, it's already March.
It is March.
By the way.
Yep.
Now we, in Minnesota, we're on to fake spring, which we've had for about 2 weeks now, where all the snow has melted and it was like 50 degrees. And this week, all the snow is back.
Yep. Yeah. March is a wild card. You never know what's going to happen in March in Minnesota.
That's right. All right. Well, headliner news. We have already talked about the TypeScript 6 beta, but guess what dropped last week? The TypeScript 6 release candidate.
That's right. And not a whole ton has changed. You won't be surprised. The gist is there's been a few changes to align with the behavior of 6 and 7. 6, 7. And then there was one adjustment in the type checking for function expressions and generic calls. This especially affects those occurring in generic JSX expressions. They have a linked pull request in their blog post. You can see the example. Kind of in the weeds on that one. There's also, remember we talked about the deprecation of the import assert syntax.
Yeah.
It's import with syntax now. So this deprecation is now extending to the import dynamic calls. So like import open banana, yada, 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 assert, that's now deprecated as well, which you kind of expect.
That makes sense.
And then lastly, the DOM types have been updated to reflect the latest standards, including some adjustments to temporal. So
perfect. We now have temporal API typings in TypeScript 6 RC.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's some TypeScript 7 buzz out there. Connor Shea posted that they merged TypeScript 7 for a work code base. A little ahead of the course, I think. But they went from a 35-second type check to an 8-second type check on an 11K React file.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a wild file. I'm kind of curious what's in there.
That's over 10,000.
That's over 10,000.
I hope its React power is over 10,000 too.
It's over 9,000.
What's new in ECMAScript?
Some excitement in ECMAScript. The INTL era and month code got to stage 4 in TC39 yesterday. And that also extends the temporal spec as well. The old name of this was the INTL temporal proposal. This is specifying the necessary details about era year, and month code usage in a temporal internationalization setting for calendars other than the ISO 8601. So, for example, there are different calendars on Earth than like the one that we're using, the ISO calendar. You might have, for example, Gregorian calendar. You might have the Buddhist calendar, the Japanese calendar. That factors in here for these types of calendars.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And next, there is another TC39 advancement to stage 2.7, and this is the error.prototype.stack. This is kind of a de facto standard, and we're just penning it into law, so to speak. This exists in browsers, but this just seeks to standardize the thing that already exists. So that's when I say de facto standard, it exists, but it's not standardized.
Yep. Okay. That's cool. So remember in the last episode, we said, get ready for some changes to the node release schedule. So that draft blog post has now been published. So if you go to the nodejs.org blog, you can read more about what's going to be happening after Node 27. But basically, there's going to be one major release per year. And that'll come out in April and get promoted to LTS in like October, I believe. So the versioning is just going to get simpler so that when you say Node 27, you're talking about 2027. When you talk about Node 28, you're talking about the April 2028 release. It'll just make it a little bit easier to plan and talk about Node.js.
That's right. And speaking of release cycles, Chrome is now moving to a 2-week release cycle. Yeah. That's fast. This new release cycle means that a new beta and stable version of Chrome will ship every 2 weeks, starting from the stable release of Chrome 153 on September 18th. And this applies to all platforms too, so desktop, Android, and iOS. There will be no changes to the dev and canary channels, and there will be no change to the extended stable. We introduced, in their blog post, they say, we introduced extended stable in 2021, and there's no change there. So the idea here is they need to keep shipping stuff faster. This will make things like less disruption, minimize the effort to debug new releases. And there's been a ton of security stuff lately. So it kind of also makes sense from that perspective to be more nimble there.
Yes. Along with that, Chrome 146, the stable Chrome 146 is rolling out this week. And there's some cool stuff in here. If you ever do scroll triggered animations, this gives you scroll position based control of those animations. So for example, playing, pausing, and resetting animations. So just quoting from the blog post, a common pattern on pages across the web is to start an animation when a scroll position is reached. Developers often do this by using JavaScript to manually detect that an element is within its scroll container's viewport and to start a corresponding animation. For example, sliding that element into view. Many of these use cases rely on declaratively provided information. This feature lets you create such interactions declaratively with CSS. No JavaScript. We like that. I've been surprised at some of the new CSS scroll stuff that you can do. So today I was working on revamping my homepage or adding some stuff to my app's homepage, and I wanted in the nav bar some links that go down to different sections in the page, and I wanted it to smoothly scroll. And so a long time ago, 10 years ago, I would have had to use JavaScript to do scroll to or whatever and do a smooth scroll. But you don't have to do that. You can just set scroll behavior smooth on the page or in a scroll container, and it will just smoothly scroll. The other thing I wanted to do is that I have a fixed element at the top. That's the header, the nav, so that it's always visible. You can use scroll padding top to add an offset so that when it does smoothly scroll, it smoothly scrolls exactly to the right spot. No JavaScript. CSS is amazing, people.
It is pretty amazing.
The other thing that is kind of cool about this release, and I want to learn more about this because I don't really know anything about it, is the Sanitizer API. Have you heard about this?
Not until this release.
Okay, so the Sanitizer API offers a way to remove content that might execute script from arbitrary user-supplied HTML content. The goal is to make it easier to build XSS, which is cross-site scripting free web applications. This is an updated version of a previous attempt to create a Sanitizer API. This new version is also available in Firefox. So this is cool because we've typically had to use third-party libraries like DOM Purify to do XSS sanitization, but this is a web API, the Sanitizer API, to do it, which is really cool, I think.
Yeah, this is super neat. This will be huge.
Yep. So hopefully there's probably already a polyfill, but I could see this, if this is available, use this, otherwise use, DOM Purify or, fallback, but that's really cool.
We had a ton of meta framework news, especially Astro 6.
Yeah. Astro fans rejoice. New major version. What is new in it, Eric?
A ton of stuff. So they have a new redesigned Astro Dev CLI. So you now can run a custom runtime environment during development. This is using the underlying Vite environments API. But one of the cool things here is for Cloudflare users, they support running all of the development aspects, like development, pre-rendering, and production in worker D, in Cloudflare. So
cool.
if that was your life, you can now test in a production-like environment locally, which is awesome, which you want.
Actually, I deployed a little Cloudflare worker this past week, and I was using Wrangler, which has all that stuff built in. And it's just really cool that you can use the D1 local database from in your dev environment, so you can make sure that everything works. But previously with Astro, you couldn't do that. You were running blind, right? If you were trying to develop a Cloudflare worker, you were not getting your D1 bindings or anything like that. But now with the redesigned Astro Dev, now you do.
Next, they have a built-in fonts API. You and I know that fonts suck. They are hard a lot of times in weird ways, but they've tried to make this easy for you. You can use fonts from local files or from providers like Google or FontSource. So they'll take care of the hard work for fonts for you and just make it work.
That's really nice. I kind of want to learn more about optimizing web fonts because I do use them, and I use them both for icons through Font Awesome, and I use them from like Google Fonts. And so I feel like I'm doing some stuff wrong there or like not optimized. So this is probably something I got to look into.
Also, live content collections are now stable in Astro 6. So you can bring a request time content fetching to to Astro's unified content layer. So what does this actually mean? Well, this means that you can live query content on your page and just have it work.
Yeah, because before you had to rebuild your site. Like there was a build
That's
step.
right.
So
Yep.
you don't now. There's no build step required. Your content updates the moment it's published without touching your build pipeline. So that means CMS content, API data, and editorial updates all go live instantly. Like this is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So like if I wanted to redo the marketing site for Keep Track of My Games, I could use Astro, and if I want to publish like a little update to the page to do some testing or whatever, I don't have to rebuild.
That's right.
Yeah, that's cool. There's a new content security policy updates. If you're not familiar with CSP, it's a web security feature. Basically, the browser enforces constraints on like what resources you can fetch based on allowed domains, so that if someone does, do an XSS attack on you where they try to embed like my.maliciousite.com, that will be blocked by the browser at the browser level. So the request won't even go out to that site. So it's just another defense in depth measure, but it looks like they've added more ability to do CSP headers and things like that so that it works on both dynamic and static content.
That's right. And one of the things that can be challenging with CSPs is you can provide a hash for your style or scripts. That way you could be like, oh, this is what I expect this script to hash to. And if you got injected, it wouldn't.
Yep. That's a really nice feature, by the way. Should definitely use that if you can. They've upgraded a bunch of like core packages. So obviously Vite 7 is now used. That's what gave them the environment API, Shiki 4, Zod 4. And then Astro 6 also now requires Node 22 above. So they drop support for 18 and 20. And by the way, that will give you type stripping also. So you could write your Astro files in TypeScript without a build step, I bet. So that's pretty cool. This is interesting. What is this experimental feature here?
Yeah. So they have a new experimental Rust compiler, and it is the successor to their original Go-based .astro compiler. So this started as an AI experiment, and it went from, in their blog post, they say, can this work? To why isn't this the default? So the new compiler is faster and produces stronger diagnostics, and in some cases more reliable than the current Go compiler.
That's cool. So this is like their internal way of like how they compile your site.
Yeah. Pretty neat stuff.
Neat.
Another experimental feature that is introduced in Astro 6 is queued rendering. And this is showing some promise, up to 2 times faster rendering.
Wow. So I think to understand this, because I don't really know how Astro does stuff, but it says, today Astro renders components recursively. Rendering functions call themselves as they walk the component tree. Queued rendering replaces this with a 2-pass approach. The first pass traverses the tree and emits an ordered queue, and then the second pass renders it. So the result is both faster and more memory efficient, and we plan to make it the default rendering strategy in Astro v7. That's actually really neat.
This kind of sounds like how you do video game graphics with like batch rendering, where you produce a list of draw commands, and then you go through it and you batch up all of those commands and you draw them in an efficient order.
Does Excalibur do that?
Yes.
Good. That was the right answer.
Yes, it does. And in fact, you have to try really hard for it to not do it. It does it transparently behind the scenes. So
Awesome.
You have to try really hard to get out of batched rendering.
Yep. They've got another experimental feature. Man, they're shipping a bunch of experiments. Route caching. Astro 6 includes an experimental route caching API that gives you a platform agnostic way to cache server rendered responses using web standard cache semantics. That is actually really neat. Caching SSR responses today is harder than it should be. Every host does it differently, and there's no standard way to control it from your application code. Route caching gives you a single platform-agnostic API. You set caching directives in your routes, and Astro handles the rest regardless of where you deploy. That's really neat. Yeah.
I eat that up. Caching is one of the hardest problems for sure.
Yep.
So this is a huge feature. So
yeah,
I definitely want to be checking this out.
That's right. So you can go check out the blog post for more, but those are all the headlines from Astro 6. Next up, the static site generator that you know and love, Eleventy, in version 4 is going to be renamed to Build Awesome. And if you're like, oh, well, that's interesting, what has gone into that? Well, I kind of forgot that Eleventy actually joined Font Awesome in September 2024. And so they had done a Kickstarter for Web Awesome, and that was successful. And so now Zach is doing the same thing, where he's launching a Build Awesome Kickstarter. And this is to hopefully go like full-time and stuff with Eleventy, which is really cool. But as part of that, Eleventy is going to be renamed, but Zach is still going to be the steward of the project. If you've loved Eleventy in the past, you're going to continue loving the new Build Awesome. So we'll link to that if you want to check out the Kickstarter, and you can also read like what does this mean and how's this going to work.
And they have a funny Kickstarter name, build _awesome final v2.
And then Svelte has just a community post, what's new in Svelte for March 2026. So this just goes over what happened in February. It does cover some of the CVEs that Svelte had, because we did cover that. But, as a reminder, you want to go check that out. But they've also got like links to some community projects and all that kind of cool stuff. And then lastly, we do have a quick PSA. Eric, do you remember that I did a course on Qwik?
I do remember that.
The front-end framework. And Qwik is cool because it's basically TypeScript first, and it has a unique rendering strategy versus other React frameworks like Next.js. Because this is not React, it's Qwik. So Qwik is a library, but there's also Qwik City, which is the meta framework. But point is, they did have a remote code execution vulnerability, and it was due to some legacy code that was unused but was still present in the API, and so they removed that. And so it's a just if you're out there and you're using Qwik, make sure you update.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah. Those RCEs are no bueno. Moving on to Library Watch, we have an exciting announcement that ArkType 2.2 just dropped.
Yeah,
with a ton of stuff.
First of all, if you're like, what is ArkType? Make sure you go listen to our interview with David from ArkType, and he will explain everything to you. It's a super great library. It's an alternative to Zod, but it does a little bit more than that. It does like runtime typings, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it tries to be as one-to-one with TypeScript as possible.
Yeah, speaking of runtime validated types, they added type.fn for runtime validated functions. So,
what?
Yeah, so this is pretty slick. So you can do type.fn, a type DSL, like that will be runtime validated. So you can say, okay, and it's using TypeScript syntax. So you can say type.fn, open banana, string or unknown, comma, and it returns a number type. And then you can pass it a function that you want to validate at runtime, and it'll do it. It'll return you out a function that is validated at runtime.
That's super neat.
Pretty slick. Also, they added type safe regex, which is, there's a standalone package called ArkRegex if you just want that, and it's just a type only package. You just use that instead of regex, and you just get types out of your regexes, which is wild. Just completely type magic. So that's pretty neat. They added bidirectional JSON schema with Arc JSON schema, and this can interop with the universal schema features with Zod, Valibot, standard schema. Pick your favorite.
Yeah, this is super nice. One thing that's really interesting about the type.fn validated functions is that they're introspectable. Like they support introspection. So you can like get the expression, like the raw expression, the type expression from it, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
This is like sort of blowing my mind right now. Just reading through this and like how it works. It's really neat.
One thing I didn't mention is that with typesafe regex, they have an exec mode, which you can add the X literal in front of the regular expression, and it'll parse the capture groups at runtime, and it'll be fully typed via ArkRegex. So you'd be like, I have a month capture group in there. I want to go yada 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 dot groups dot month and get the type, And you don't have to be like, is there a month here in this capture group? I don't know.
So as like a little commentary on here, this is getting so close to where, could you imagine like basically like another step that like strips like the type function, and then you basically are like writing ArkType. And this is exactly what I mean, where like, are we going to see some like subset or variation on TypeScript, which supports like runtime validation using just native type syntax? Because ArkType is so close to that, right? Because you're still writing TypeScript types just inside of string literals, right? And David's done a lot of work to make that experience really, really nice. Like, how far are we from another step that just, you don't have to use strings anymore. You can just write ArkType. You know what I mean? Anyway, food for thought.
Yeah, ArkType is pretty wild.
Yeah,
like, it's pretty amazing. Cool. They're doing a lot of like type theory type stuff that the TypeScript compiler does, but they're doing at runtime, which is, ArkType is a great complement to TypeScript.
So anyway, David, I'm waiting for ArkType runtime. So, let us know. Right. Let us know when that comes out. Okay.
Yeah, when that happens, let us know.
All right, cool. The next one, you also found a std-semver.
Kevin Degging is at it again, and he says he's always wanted to rewrite the semver package on npm, and then he found that the Dino team already did it in TypeScript on JSR, and that's at standard/semver if you're using JSR. So they ported it to npm instead. So now you can just use Dino's std library in npm with std-semver.
Yeah.
And it's a port of the Dino implementation of semver.
That's cool. This does bring up like an interesting sort of like dichotomy here of like, unfortunately, so JSR is great in that it supports npm packages, but it's not the other way around. npm does not support JSR packages. You have to use a special command to like add it. You have to use like an npx JSR command, which basically kind of does the same thing, but it's not officially, through npm. So it's kind of unfortunate that Kevin even had to do this, There's not like a mutual interoperability between the npm registry and the JSR registry. There's only a one-way. But yep. Anyway, community highlights. What's new in the community?
Well, there's a great YouTube video from Web Dev Simplified, which is a great YouTube channel in general if you're not subscribed. But they go over when to use return types and when not to. Spoiler alert, we've already had this conversation before, and spoiler alert, they agree with our conclusions on this. But if you want to see this in action and where return types are useful and when they're not useful, definitely watch this video. It's a short one. It's only 12 minutes long.
Nice. That is really nice because I think like it makes sense in my head, but like I think people need to see it, like see why it's not a great idea in every single case,
Yeah. And if you want the TLDR application code, usually you want to infer the type unless you have like a common like shared library inside of your application code and you want to make sure that you're not making any breaking changes. That's when return types are super useful if you want to maintain a contract. And when you're doing library authoring, it's very important to have return types, in my experience, because it's super easy to make an accidental breaking change to your types.
Next up, we have a blog post from friend of the show, Mauro, the creator of Astro.js, and he's asking whatever happened to JavaScript service workers. This is kind of near and dear to my heart because I like service workers, but they are kind of a bear to work with. They're used for creating progressive web apps. And I mean, we use them at Target to create like an app shell for the site. And I'd like to use them for my own app to do offline capability. But the thing is that the hardest part with them is figuring out the caching strategy. Because not only the caching of like how you want to handle requests and whether or not you want to pass them through, store them, like do a stale while revalidate kind of pattern, but also when to reinstall the service worker itself. Because you can get into a lot of issues with users having outdated versions of your service worker, and suddenly there can easily be like breaking incompatibilities, and like you broke your site unless you instruct the user to like clear their cache or something like that. So you have to be real careful. And there are like libraries, and he even mentions this. There are libraries like Workbox, which is what we used at Target, but it does require some thinking about like how you're going to handle it, and they're not easy. So I think service workers are pretty awesome, but I would also say are pretty advanced. Like you really have to think about how you're going to use them and how you're going to architect. But the cool thing is that Mauro did put together some templates for creating a Mastro site that uses service workers. So he's asking for what other use cases do you use service workers for, and that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool.
Next, we have a blog post from pnpm talking about how they mitigate supply chain attacks. And we've seen a lot of this in recent memory. NPM packages are being compromised, published with malware. There's a lot of defense in depth things like secure, trusted publishing, so that you can't just publish with a token from anywhere. You have to publish from, a particular GitHub action from a particular path. You have provenance, so it came from here and that the code is the same as what the author claims it is in the package. But in their blog post, they talk about how pnpm itself is mitigating supply chain attacks.
Nice.
So the TLDR is that there's a few things that pnpm does to minimize the risks. So one, blocking risky post-install scripts. Historically, most packages have used post-install scripts to unload their payload, their malicious payload. pnpm v10 automatically disables those. So, you can set dangerously allow all builds. Definitely think twice about doing that. You can also explicitly list trusted dependencies using the all builds configuration setting. Again, this doesn't really help you if something that you trust gets compromised. You can prevent exotic transitive dependencies. So, for example, they're talking about like dependencies that reference like a Git repository or a direct tarball URL. This is almost never good. And if you are using these, what are you doing? Don't do that. You can delay dependency updates, so you can set a minimum release age. So this is probably a good thing to do for like at least a day, probably more. Most like huge supply chain attacks are caught within 24 hours. So if you lag behind 24 hours, maybe 2 days, that's probably a healthy medium. You can also enforce trust with the trust policy. What does that do?
So if you set it to no downgrade, this setting will prevent installation of a package if its trust level has decreased compared to previous releases.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, so I think you definitely want to do that. And then there's also like an exclude setting or an ignore setting and stuff like that, because there might be cases where, I don't know, where that happens.
And the only time I can think of that happening is if I am the library dev and I'm playing around with something.
Right.
And I'm doing something locally. Like, that's the only time I can think of like needing to bypass the trust policy is if I'm doing development somehow.
True. Yep. And then, of course, they end with just saying use a lock file, obviously. So I think most modern package managers generate a lock file for you. So use that. I would say it's interesting they don't mention this, but I guess pnpm does it correctly. But in npm, you want to use the npm CI command if you're in a CI environment. Don't use npm install, even with a lock file.
That's right.
Otherwise, you'll be sad.
Yep, you will be sad. npm CI, por favor.
Yep. So probably pnpm does it properly, where you don't have to worry about that.
Probably. Next up, we have a interesting blog post for you F# people out there. If you want your TypeScript to feel like F#, this blog post is for you. They go through how to like do discriminated unions, which is, those are both first-class citizens in TypeScript and F#. So that one's not too surprising. But they talk about how to use exhaustive pattern matching, which is a very common feature in F#, but can be done with the never and satisfies keywords in TypeScript, which we've talked about before, exhaustive types, and how to do immutability, yada, 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 all the good stuff that you like about F# and how to do that in TypeScript. So check that out.
Nice.
Next up is a blog post by John Kuperman of Bloomberg and TC39 member, I believe, about how they went through shipping standard source maps. So did you know for the long time, source maps were not standardized? There was no standard describing source maps. It was just kind of a de facto standard. So this talks about how source maps are implemented and how it went a decade without a standard and how it is now a standard.
All right, cool. The next community post is actually from Patreon, their engineering team. They pushed out a post, 7 years to TypeScript. So this is a migration blog post, and I like it a lot. It really goes into like the realistic kind of like, here's what we tried to do, here's what didn't really work. And the thing that didn't really work was like a grassroots sort of like, hey, you can migrate to TypeScript if you want to. Well, it turns out after a few years, that didn't really go very well. Less than 10% of our code base was in TypeScript after doing that. So then from 2022 to 2024, they formed a front-end platform team, which sounds familiar because that was my last job at Target. And their core team charter was to improve developer experience. And so then they were able to build a foundation for like TypeScript first class tooling, right? So they built that, and they actually took on the whole like effort to migrate over like 2,000 JavaScript files to TypeScript. So you can read the blog post. It's really good. Like it goes into a lot of detail for like what they did. So it's pretty interesting stuff.
Awesome. I have a blog post from Asana, and if you're not familiar with Asana, this is kind of like a Jira competitor, but it's talking about how they were scaling their GraphQL type system called LunaDB. Not very important what it's named, but they're using GraalVM. Remember, we talked about this as a way to do polyglot programming with elide.dev with Sam Gammon. Check that show out. But they use with TypeScript and Scala in the same process, so they can avoid rewriting the same kind of server-side logic in Scala and TypeScript and having to maintain two separate implementations.
Yeah.
I can do run this code in proc with their Scala code, which has really helped them overcome some engineering challenges. I encourage you to read the blog post.
That's cool. I've sung the praises of Aspire before because I recently migrated all my course materials to Aspire so that people can run my MCP server with Azure Cloud resources and all sorts of stuff baked in one single command. Is super useful. And so friend of the show, Josh Goldberg, is going to be giving a talk at the upcoming AspireConf, which is coming up in March, and his talk is TypeScript and Aspire. So I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yep, and it looks like you can watch it live on YouTube or Twitch.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to like .NET Conf, where it's free to watch and attend live on YouTube.
Yeah, we'll include the link to the live stream. Again, that's going to be on March 23rd. And you can watch
March 23rd. That's only in a couple weeks.
Only in a couple weeks. Another really interesting article for you astronomy nerds out there. There's How to Flatten a Sphere, Astronomy with TypeScript. So this is kind of fun if you want to explore some like classic like astronomy calculations in TypeScript. They go through it all and with very well documented TypeScript here, and with a visualization of how you can flatten a sphere onto a 2D projection.
That's cool.
Which is kind of neat. And this is actually kind of useful for me because I need to do billiard ball stuff. And I'm doing billiard balls in a 2D simulation. So this is like 100% perfect for what I'm doing.
That's cool. And finally, just as a reminder, super JavaScript educator Kent C. Dodds has a new workshop, Practical TypeScript Foundations to Fluency, recently on sale. I think that the sale's ended, but it's obviously still available, and you can sign up, and he's got a fantastic app set up where it's like an interactive learning experience. You get really hands-on with TypeScript. You have to actually do real exercises, and you get checked on it, and all sorts of stuff. So, and it's really geared for folks who have zero experience with JavaScript or TypeScript, and also for senior engineers who need to get brushed up on their TypeScript. So he goes into like mapped types and generics and unions and all that kind of good stuff, like in Module 2 or Module 3. So,
and this is a very much a hands-on keyboard style course.
Yeah, it's not like a traditional kind of video course or YouTube. Like you're not just passively watching, you are actually hands-on keyboard building stuff, which is cool. All right, we do have a secret of the handbook segment.
Yeah.
It's less of a secret, I suppose, and more of like a interesting discussion of like, did you know? The more you know. And I saw this on Reddit, and it was one of the hot topics this last week. And the title goes, "Why doesn't TypeScript merge the private keyword with the hashtag private syntax in the language?" And Eric, do you want to explain why they don't merge those two together?
Well, technically, they're different semantics. And private existed before the JavaScript concept of private, which is the hash symbol that prefixes a member variable. And they're different semantics. The private keyword in TypeScript is just a lie. All of that stuff is actually still accessible. And the hash is actually private. There's no amount of like stuff you can do in JavaScript to get at that member if it's private. So if you were to merge it, it would break code because you would suddenly make things inaccessible to JavaScript that maybe it was counting on before. And maybe that's like, you could argue that's maybe a bug. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's, who knows? But also, if you're changing what you typed, like if you're doing like runtime emit, that kind of walks against the current like ethos of TypeScript, which is no more runtime emit.
Yeah,
just
that's
type
true.
stripping.
That's true. So that's sort of talking about erasable syntax only, which is sort of becoming the new sort of philosophy of new TypeScript features of like they need to be erasable at runtime. So it's not doing a special emit. That's why enums are deprecated. That's why constructor, accessor, visibility keywords are being deprecated and not supported in erasable syntax only. So this would be one of those types of features. So yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's sort of like kind of interesting because like I think in the early days of TypeScript, you could have argued like, yeah, maybe it should transform and emit like the actual private field and we'll deprecate the old behavior. And this is a breaking change, so we'll do that. But I think with the modern philosophy, it just goes against that now. So I don't think we're going to see that. I think more likely we'll just see a deprecation of that keyword. Yep.
All right. We got some cool links.
Yeah, hit me up. What was cool this past week for you?
Well, if you're not aware, there is a webweekly.email newsletter, which has got cool stuff on it. And did you know, here's a fun fact that I learned from this week's newsletter, is that there is a window.stop.
What does that do?
Window.stop stops all of the current like things that are processing and downloading. So if we go to MDN, let's read window.stop. So I get it right. Window.stop stops further resource loading in the current browsing context, equivalent to the stop button in the browser. I had no idea that was a thing.
Okay. That makes sense. Wonder what use cases you would use that for.
Well, perhaps you have an intensive web application and you're like, you know what? I'm giving up. I'm giving up on this. Next up is a Pokemon quiz. So it's pkmnquiz.com, where you can try to remember all 151 original Pokemon and see how far you get. I have a lot of information rattling around in my brain, and I still have all 151 Pokemon on the tips of my fingers. And I wish I remembered other stuff instead, like phone numbers and stuff. But no, I've got Pokemon.
Or your siblings' birthdays.
That's right. I don't know. That's what Google Calendar's for.
Exactly. My wife makes fun of me all the time about that. I'm like, there's too much. I can't remember dates. And then you've got another cool Pokemon link. You were like last week and this week, you've really been into Pokemon. And I guess
Pokemon pilled.
I did read some more Pokemon stuff too. Again, because it's the 30-year anniversary. So there's just a lot of Pokemon content going around.
Yeah. This next link is a YouTube video from Lazy Devs, which they go into how all of the maps are stitched together in the original Pokemon games, which if you didn't think about it, it's like, how did they make these huge maps on such limited hardware? There had to be some stitching involved. And they go through how that all works and what the data structure is in the original and how you can apply that to your own games today.
Yeah, that's cool. A long time ago, I had an idea of doing a very similar kind of like open world RPG that is in 2D. And I wanted to do that type of thing where I stitched multiple tiles together to create like a huge map. But it has to be performant because you can't just load the entire map into memory, right? Like, then I was a teenager, so I didn't really have the understanding of like what data structures to use to do that type of stuff. So this is really cool.
Yeah. Definitely take a look if you are a video game enthusiast.
Very good. I guess I have 2 links maybe, but the one that came across our desk in the Discord, someone posted the proposal in C# to bring union types. And I was like, yes, this is like the number one feature I've been waiting for in C#. It's the number one feature that I miss from TypeScript is unions.
Yeah, this is huge. Yeah, and I can't wait.
This makes a ton of sense too, because F# supports unions. And if you want better F# and C# interop, like this makes a ton of sense. So yeah, so I'll link to that proposal. You can check it out if you want to. I mean, it's very, formal. It's a formal proposal. And then the other thing that my brother told me about, he has been playing Resident Evil 9. And I last played Resident Evil 7, so like I haven't even checked out Resident Evil 8 yet. But if you remember the classic Resident Evils, you played as Leon Black, and he's kind of a sort of a famous fan favorite character. You actually play 2 different characters in Resident Evil 9. One is, I think, Grace, which is the person I would assume that Leon is trying to save. I don't know that for sure because I've not watched a trailer at all. Like I don't know anything about this. But my brother said that he finished it and the game was awesome and that I have to play it. So I guess he was saying that if you like sort of the survival horror, if you like that style of gameplay and miss that from the originals, Grace is the character to play. Because she's not overpowered like Leon. And if you want the action adventure sort of gameplay, then you play as Leon. So I'll probably check that out, put it on the backlog,
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's time for the Minnesota long goodbye.
Long goodbye.
What's rattling around in that noggin of yours?
Types of 1.
Yes.
We got TypeScript 6.7. happening. That joke is never going to get tired. We've got ArkType 2.2 just dropping.
Yeah.
We got meta frameworks dropping with TypeScript support. Astro 6, notably. Yeah, it just feels like everything's coming up TypeScript.
Coming up TypeScript, yeah. I do think there's something interesting for the ArkType stuff. Because David has designed a really clean API, like there's you only import one thing from ArkType, which is the type keyword. So it's like, how can you take that? How you just take that out of it? Because he's already done so much work to do the parsing and syntax highlighting to make the developer experience of like those quote unquote like magic strings work well, right? So those strings are type checked, but the issue is that in a traditional editor, you don't get syntax highlighting for strings, right? So he's built all the tooling to make sure that those strings look like TypeScript syntax highlighting, right? And so I feel like the next logical step is once everything is stable and working really well, you build something that just sort of removes that little layer of abstraction, like that type function, sort of like JSX almost. That's kind of what I'm thinking of, because originally with JSX, in regular JavaScript, you'd have to import a function, then you would pass objects like function calls to build the tree of components, right? Because you're doing like react.createElement. That's basically what the angle bracket syntax translates to behind the scenes in JSX, right? So it's mapping that for you. So because if you look at generated JSX code, it's just function calls, right? So I feel like if you had arc ArcTS.ArcTS files, you just have the ArkType preprocessor go through it and generate ArkType for you. Right.
That'd be cool.
So you could, and this is not even a runtime thing. This is just like a preprocessor thing where it still outputs TypeScript, right? It still outputs whatever ArkType is you write right now, but then takes a step out for you so that you get a little bit cleaner syntax and cleaner code. And that would be interesting. And then from there, then you evolve it even more to the ArkType runtime, right?
It's compilers all the way down.
Yeah, exactly.
You have the ArkType preprocessor for the TypeScript preprocessor for the JavaScript.
That's right. Yep. But I mean, at that point, then you can start getting into more of like, okay, how do we optimize this? Because, there's going to be overhead to doing that type of thing. So you're making a trade-off there, obviously, with any kind of validation schema library. Like whenever you do runtime type validation, you're taking in some overhead. But as we know, as things get mature, they can be optimized more and further.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of got to get the concept out there.
Yeah, this, I don't know what David would say, but I feel like I want to reach for ArkType in particular at that service seam, that security boundary seam, where I trust nothing. I trust nothing from the network, or I trust nothing from the user.
That's right. Speaking of that, one of the next courses I might do, so this is not like an announcement, but I tried to apply for a modern forms in React course. I did not get that one, unfortunately, but I might be getting the React security and safety course, which would be kind of cool. And one of those things is, how do we harden the server client boundary with validation libraries? And so obviously I probably have to use Zod as one of the examples, but I'm gonna, if I get the chance, I'm gonna find a way to work in ArkType as an example, because I do want to show it as an alternative.
Well, they're compatible.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And I would definitely say, like, here's standard schema, like this is a thing that you need to be aware of and you can use. And then here are some example libraries. Obviously, one of the most popular is Zod, but ArkType is another alternative if you prefer more TypeScript one-on-one syntax. But yeah, so I'll figure that out, but I don't know if I'll get that course yet. There's obviously a lot of competition in the React space for those courses, but I was offered the opportunity, so we'll see if it comes.
Exciting stuff.
All right. Well, I think it's time to get back to work, don't you think?
Yep. I got to slap a keyboard.
Cool. We'll see you later, everybody. Goodbye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to TypeScript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at comronicus.com and Eric is at ericonerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at typescript.fm.